This is the Be Helpful Podcast, where conversations with budding entrepreneurs prepare you for the wild journey of building a business or side hustle. How do you guys go about setting goals? Do you set goals around for your business? I'll just leave it there. Let me not lead the witness. Like, how do you guys go about setting goals?
Oh, I mean, we're similar to any business. We have revenue goals in terms of acquiring new business. One of our goals this year, we've done transparently to date, we've done all project based. So one of our goals this year is to get at least 4 clients on a monthly retainer. In terms of, that's just being the pace. Now we're scaling this business. So if you scale the business, you want to have infrastructure. So that's one of our goals this year, is to be able to have a monthly retainer. Expanding our offering and outreach in terms of listening to the feedback that we've gotten from our clients and the people that we've pitched before. In terms of, hey, we like this proposal, but the reason we didn't go with you is because of A. Okay, understood that. Well, that is an offering that we might not have within our arsenal right now. Okay, one, how can we combat that? Do we add somebody with that skill set to our team? Do we uncover a new opportunity to help alleviate that concern while not maybe 100% directly addressing it, but are we alleviating that concern based off of the skill set of which we have? That's a new goal. I think those are how we look at in expanding our goals, is kind of built around that way. So
how frequent, like, do you guys do short-term goals, long-term goals? How do you guys approach that? Because for me, as a full-time entrepreneur now, I found that I can't just set the long-term goals when I had that stability of a job like I used to. And so I try to plot out, okay, these are the things that I want to accomplish this year. And then I try to chop these things up into, like, sometimes week by week, so that I can keep that balance of looking forward, but also managing my hands and some of that kind of hands-on keyboard work. So I'm curious for you guys, given the success that you guys have found and your attempt to scale and grow, like, how are you guys level setting, sitting back and evaluating your success or failures, or learnings, I should say, around the goals?
That's a good question. I was actually talking to somebody about that. One of the things I say right now is I remind myself daily that this is working.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times as you're building the business, like to your point, the goalpost keeps moving, right?
Yes.
Like, if you make $1 million, you want to make 10 million. You make it 10 million, you want to make 100 million, right?
Yeah.
But you got to remind yourself, and it's like, this is working. Like,
Yeah.
I no longer have to, like, going back to with the side hustle, I don't have to develop. I have a business. That's not a question. That's not the problem. The business is there. Now my job is scaling this business. That is two entirely different things. But at the same time, within that, to be able to look back and say, this is working, right?
Yeah.
Even for me to be able to say, I had a call this week with this C-suite of this Fortune 100 company, one-on-one. Like, even if that doesn't get money directly from them, like, this is working. The fact that I was able to do, I was referred to this person by somebody else, or I got this person email on LinkedIn and did a cold outreach, but our capabilities decks were strong enough to where they wanted to have a conversation with me. That is work. Like, that's a win. Even if it doesn't make any, like, immediate financial success in terms of, all right, here's an RFP or here's an SOW. Like, the fact that they're willing to have that conversation with me as a representation of my business, not one of these larger $50 million, $100 million agency conglomerates, with me, that is valid. Like, this is working. Because if they didn't see any value in me at all, they wouldn't even be having the conversation, right?
Yeah.
So I say, to your point, in terms of how do you, in the day-to-day, focus on goal setting, that is a goal. I think one of the quotes I heard, I forget who said it, but one of the quotes I heard before was, sometimes the goal is just enjoying the journey itself.
That's real.
And if you look at it from that aspect, because it's like, you don't really have control of what happens. You can have a great business plan, but how you pivot is how you prosper, right? Like, you can have a hard set business plan, and then you get to start at step A, you get to step D, and then E's afterwards. But then once you got to D, someone's like, hey, I can actually, this person might be able to go straight to G.
Yeah.
Are you gonna then go to E if you could just go straight to G? You probably gonna go straight to G, but you didn't know that opportunity was gonna come.
Right.
But like you
Right.
have to have the big level vision of as well to be able to how you pivot is how you prosper. So I would say that in terms of that, and in terms of lessons and learnings, kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of no, especially in this advertising business, no doesn't mean never, right?
Yeah.
One of the things I'm really big on is, and I tell my team, even if when we finish a proposal, like an RFP, even if I tell them, hey, even if we don't win this proposal's strong. Like, and I tell
Yeah.
people that all the time. Even if we don't win like we can look each other in the face and say, this strategy is good, our
Hmm.
recommendation is solid. This is a solid proposal. Because mind you, it's not just us. They're going and they're getting other proposals out there as well. So they might pick somebody else. But there's
Yeah.
no way they look at this proposal and say, this was not good. Right? So there's gonna be
Right.
somebody else that's better than ours. But the goal within this business, like, do you firmly believe when they look at this proposal, can they internally say, like, this is a strong ass proposal, right? They might
Right.
not pick it, but if they
Right.
do that, they're gonna come back to you for another RFP, right?
Right.
And then you pitch that one, or they might even come back to you. Hey, based on the last proposal you had, you know what? At the time it didn't really fit, but we liked a lot of what your messaging was, a lot of what your strategy was in that proposal. We want to carve out some budget for you guys specifically to do that. That has happened. Those are
Yeah.
the kind of things in terms of like, it's like just learning along the way that way.
Yeah. No, it's it, I think what you said is really powerful, and it makes me think. I listen to a lot of sports podcasts, and athletes often say there are no moral victories. But I think in business there are such things as moral victories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the big win is winning the deal. There's
Yep.
a whole lot of other small wins that can happen, and like you said, if you as a team, if your team can sit back and say, this was a strong proposal. And if the person we sent it to has a positive perspective and we gain their respect, that is a win.
Correct.
Even if we don't get we get the dollars and cents of the business, because it can turn into a future proposal or a referral to a
Correct.
competitor or a friend that's like, hey,
Correct.
you got to talk to these guys. These guys are amazing. Like
Correct.
that is a really good perspective to have
Correct.
and
And
maintain.
I think and I like that analogy to the point in the sports world, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
In the business world, it does. Right.
Yeah.
So that, in the business world, it does. So that exactly. And that's kind of how we say that. But that's also is understanding. It's like really understanding the feedback as to why they didn't like it. Like
Yeah.
one of the things my mentor told me, it was like the feedback that we've got on a couple of proposals. It was like, hey, well, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? And I'm like, okay. And his feedback was, don't be upset that you didn't win. Because like
Yeah.
if they didn't like your strategy, they just told you, hey, we went another direction. Or they
Right.
wouldn't have responded. The fact
Right.
that they came back and even started asking questions, that's to validate if your strategy is actually correct. So that
Right.
means that your approach you took was strong, your recommendation at a high level. So obviously any client's always going to tweak even the winning proposal to
Right.
fit their true needs. But the fact that they even come back with questions, even if you don't win, that is a positive because it reminds you that like the work that you are putting out there is being received well. So
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So um, oh, uh, another thing that we said we wanted to talk about is self reflection and leadership and continuously learning. And I think that the conversation around moral victories or kind of seeing the positive and the wins and things is super helpful. One of the questions that I have, and I'm going to borrow from another guest, who's a learning coach, and he talked about this framework of, plan, do, reflect. That's how you get better at anything. And a lot of times people forget about the reflecting. And so I would like to hear from you. What does reflecting look like for you? Not only just on your personal journey as an entrepreneur, but also in business. How do you reflect and what does that look like? And is that practice just tremendously useful for you?
no, yeah. Reflecting is always key for me. Um, I do a lot of reflecting a lot because honestly, I know I have a very unique personality.
Mm,
In this sense that like I'm very direct. Um, and to that point, when you can be very direct, when people can also at times take that as abrasiveness or abrasive because they're not really used to people being direct.
Yeah.
For like to the point, like one of my least favorite forms of communication is the compliment sandwich. Like, I get why people utilize it, but I don't need, just give it to me straight. That's how I am, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I say that to say, as I'm continuing reflecting, I understand that like I realize like I can be in the midst of conversations and to where it's like people that know me know that's like duh, other people don't. Like, I remember I was on a call with a client one time, transparently, and it was two people on the client, with like our day-to-day client lead, and then another person on the call. And the secondary person wasn't our day-to-day client lead. Transparent, like Evan, like I want to be honest with, like I feel like you're a little bit difficult to work with. And then the woman who was the client lead on my call actually chimed in before I said anything and was like, "Is he, or does he just know what he's talking about?" And I was like, um, but I realize it's like a lot of people that you deal with, they're not used to people even challenging them, even with strategy based behind it. They're just used to a lot of people just saying yes, right?
Yeah.
Or just adhering, especially if you're dealing with clients, just adhering to what they request. And I'm not saying, obviously, if you're advertising is a service based industry as an agency, so I'm not saying that I go do my most to go beyond, above, and deliver for my clients. But I realize that also that in my delivery and approach sometimes, because how I do just challenge and ask questions to try to get to the root of conversations, that oftentimes people can take that as pushback or things of that nature. So I'm constantly kind of reflecting about how that went or how this conversation went. And then even my business partner, he's very different than me. He's very like, if you had a good cop, bad cop, I would be the bad cop. So if there's
Yeah.
situations like that, I'll even call him and be like, "Hey, how did you think that conversation went?" Or
Yeah.
like, "Did you think what I said?" I could tell when I said this, and then he'll give me honest feedback that way. So that's one of the things I've kind of continued to grow and improve and evolve in that regard, is learning that not everybody um, is receptive to every single communication style. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's it reminds me back when I was a consultant, I have, it's a blessing and a curse. Um, People call it the likability factor,
mhm.
which is kind of a weird thing to say. I don't know if it's a compliment, but I'll take it as one. But at the same time, it becomes very hard to flip the switch and be direct,
Yep.
right? And like turn the switch of like, well, are you mad at me? It's like, I'm not mad. I'm just going to tell you exactly what I feel like needs to be said in this moment. And, you know, trying to manage the emotions and try to kind of manage the relationship and
Yep.
still maintain that trust, especially in the client services business, is just so hard. It's I mean,
It's funny.
some of the bags I have are because of that.
It's funny you say that. I get the inverse a lot. Like, to then when we go out to dinner, go out to drinks, they're like, "You're very different, like in person or when you have to drink." I'm like, "Yeah, this is not work." It's like, yeah, now we just kicking and hanging out, having a good time. Like, but
Yeah,
like work that's work, right? This is like, we can I talk to you about your kids, your nieces, your nephews, your wife.
yeah,
We can be friends, but when
yeah,
we at work, we work it. You know what I'm saying? A lot of
yeah,
people, like, that's kind of just like, that's kind of what's kind of a unique difference between me too. Is like, um, a lot of people don't really know how to separate friendship and business. Kind of going back to saying that likability
for sure,
factor.
for
So to
sure.
your point, like they like you a lot, but then when it's time for you to be stern, and you're
All of a
stern,
sudden,
and it's not a personal thing, it's a strictly business. They take it personal because it's like, "Hey, I thought you were my friend. How could, like, what's up? Why are you doing, like," and you're trying to say like, "No, it's not personal, it's business." Whereas like my thing is like, this is business, Evan. This is
hmm
personal, Evan. Like,
right?
when we're discussing business, like, there's no if and no buts. Like, we can disagree today, and it
Yeah,
can get kind of heated, and then 6 o'clock, hey, you want to go get drinks, and then we
right,
don't got to talk about work at all. You know what I'm saying? So it's
right.
like, but also understanding like that doesn't work for everybody. So those are kind of one things I'm constantly reflecting and constantly kind of learning and growing, evolving. I've got much better than even the last 2 years, really. But that's kind of one of the things you just gotta keep it growing and keep evolving, keep it learning. So
Yeah. So I'm curious, as your team grows and you're inherently the team lead and you're kind of building folks that work with you. how are you managing that as a leader, right? Like, how are you balancing, like, is it just everybody just knows that Evan's going to be the direct guy? or is it, you know that there are areas that you've got to evolve in certain contexts and conversations or with certain people. I mean, I'm curious how you're looking at that.
I think it's a mixture of both.
Right.
I am good. I like being direct is who I am as my personality. It's like I will
Yeah.
never not be that because that would me being inauthentic.
Right.
Um, I think what I've gotten better at is being an over communicator in the sense of upfront. This is what I'm doing, and this is why I'm what I expect.
Right.
A great quote I heard the other day was, um, "People love to make excuses for lack of execution,"
Correct. For sure.
and that's one of the things that bothers me. For example, because one thing, and the reason it bothers me is because, say you and I were working on a project, and we agreed on Monday that this delivery you have it to us by Friday at 10 a.m. I'm not a hand holder. So I'm not a micromanager, I'm not a hand holder. We agree Friday at 10 a.m. So I expect Friday at 10 a.m. to go. I'm
Yeah.
not the kind of dude like world does. I'm not the kind of dude that just a reminder, hey, how's things coming along? I'm not that dude. Like I expect you as an adult and a professional leader, if things are not coming along or you need my assistance to reach out to me. Right.
Right.
So, but what I don't do well with, and this is why I say excuses for lack of execution, is if it gets to be 9 a.m. and it's like, oh, now I need to end the day today. That bothers me because you knew Wednesday today, what is it, 3 o'clock, that you was not going to be able to get this to me by Friday at 10 a.m. You knew that you
Right.
knew that 48 hours in advance.
Right.
And the reason that bothers me is you could have said something. You haven't reached out to me. You could have said something to me at that time. Hey, A, B, and C, and D has come up. I'm not gonna. Can I either A, I just need more time. Cool. Or if you need assistance, what can you do to help me to get this across the line? So then the problem is there isn't even a lack of execution, it's a lack of communication.
Correct. Correct.
So, and that is one of the things in terms of like me being directors, that's what I struggle with. It's like
Mm.
all you had to do, and the reason that communication is key is because if you communicate with that person up front, me or anybody else included, that empowers that other person to put another plan in place to adjust. So what
Yeah.
you so one of the things we do is we have a bunch of influencers we manage, and I tell them all the time, and I gotta break it down to them. I was like, why this is not accountable. So for that example, say they had to deliver a piece of content Friday at 10 a.m. Like for you saying today, what you're doing is you're making it all about you. Like, I'm not minimizing what you had to do throughout the day. I'm not minimizing what you had to do on Thursday, but you got to look at it from this standpoint. If they requested it Friday at 10 a.m., they requested it that deadline for a reason. This agency or client could have an internal review with their team at 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
So that's why they requested it at 10. So they get your content. Now they need to put it in a deck, put it in a keynote, whatever they need to do to make a presentation to walk through your work. And I'm sure there's probably other people submitted work at 1 o'clock. So what you've done now by asking at the end of the day, now you've put that person in the position to either have to move that meeting. Mind you, talking about Friday. So either they have to move that meeting to 4 p.m. Friday or to Monday, or that person's in the position to be like, why doesn't so and so have this work? I don't even know. I don't know was not a sufficient answer to them because you didn't communicate in enough time to be able to get it done.
Right. Right.
Whereas, like, if you'd have told me this on Wednesday when you didn't know, I could say on Wednesday, hey, so and so, Friday's not going to work with us. Is there a way we can do this? That's an entirely different conversation because now she has a whole business day even in between to reschedule that meeting, to
Yep.
level set expectations on her end. Those are the things I think people like when you're going back to your direct question about how do you go about adjusting, it's explaining it to them in that.
Yeah.
Like, this is not all about you. In that the reason you're making, again, I'm not minimizing your excuses, but your lack of execution does cause a domino effect when it comes to work that affects other people and other people's jobs. So you have to look at this as this is not all about you. And
Yeah.
too many times when people are doing, especially when it comes to work, the excuses for lack of execution, that's because they've internalized this and they made it all about them. And all you have to do is communicate ahead of time and do that. So what's what I've gotten better at, okay, I'm being direct and I'm telling you why this is not acceptable to me, but here's why.
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah.
I've gotten better at that and trying to explain to them, here's why. But then, because what that also does is like, once you know the why, then it's like, bro, like now we got to have personal accountability, bro.
Yeah. 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 It's funny because that story reminds me of a boss that I had very early on in my career. Um, and she said, if I ask you to do something, I'm not thinking about it until you bring it back up or the
Yep,
deadlines come.
100%.
And and
That's
and
it.
f- and
Yep.
for me, I remember I think I was probably 19. It was probably like my marketing internship or something. And I remember thinking, I was just like, oh, what if I got questions? She's not going to ask me if I have questions. So I guess that means I've got to go to her if I have questions. And it just started creating the habits of over communicating, to your point. And I think that as I went on in my career and became a leader, I realize that a lot of people don't inherently pick up on that,
They
and a
don't.
lot of people become kind of fearful of looking stupid or having those questions, or they think like, oh, I can get it done tomorrow. Oh, I can get it done tomorrow. And then the deadline's there, and it's just like, well, if you had this question, you could have asked me that on Tuesday. And so I think you're right. I think all of it boils down to communication, and as leaders, as we grow kind of our respective teams in our business, it's important to make sure that people have the context of your job isn't just about what you see,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a whole other chain of events that are happening that are depending on this one thing. And if you can't tell me ahead of time that what we've agreed on is not going to happen, then all of these other things are going to go wrong, and the frustration of all of that will be on you. It's not
Correct.
it's not just, oh, you missed the assignment. No, you messed up this entire campaign.
So, and it's funny you mentioned it that, well, not funny, but it's that your point is 100% correct. Because that makes me think of like people don't like to have difficult conversations, but oftentimes the conversation is actually difficult. It's not even kind of what you said. It's not even the fact that you have to ask me a question or that you might not understand something. The reason the conversation is difficult is exactly what you said, because you did not ask the question. Now this conversation is difficult because, as you just mentioned, this whole campaign got messed up. I
Yeah.
have no problem. Most people actually don't have a problem, even if you're just talking about with your family, spouse, wife, girlfriend, significant other. If you have a situation with them and they do something that bothers you and you talk to them about it, that's okay. It might not be great, but you have a conversation. Well, oftentimes it becomes heated and it gets things. It's when you let it fester and
Yep.
animosity builds up, and then you've actually had something or a myriad of different things that this person's done build up over time that have bothered you, and you never said anything to that person. So then
Right.
now, when you do finally have that conversation, the person's like, "Oh, like I didn't know you've been feeling this way." And like that's what makes that conversation difficult. And it's not even, and it might not even have to, like if you'd have just told them from the upfront, they'd have just stopped doing it from the beginning.
Right.
But you never told them. So, and so I just think that level of black people don't want to have difficult conversations. It's, and again, it's like, and I get why, because a conversations, difficult conversations can be emotional, but
Yeah.
oftentimes they don't look at it in the aspect logically rather than take the emotion of it. The reason this person actually is a difficult conversation is because you didn't empower them
Yeah.
up front with enough information to make a decision for themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely.